Okay, welcome everybody this afternoon. We're going to be talking about memoQ filters in just a bit. But the lead-in discussion, and one of the reasons why I decided to include this particular unit in the resources course, aside from the fact that filters are rather critical, is over the years I've had quite a number of discussions with translators who used CAT tools but who strangely announced to me, sometimes with great pride, that they do not use filters. And I kind of have a hard time understanding how they do that or why they believe that. It perhaps points to some education issues in the sector. But yeah, one woman I remember vividly says, I do not use filters. That is the responsibility of the project managers. Okay, well, that tells me this is an individual who doesn't have any direct customers who send, I don't know, maybe just a Microsoft Word file or a spreadsheet for translation. But I do remember asking, I don't remember what CAT tool she used, whether it was Trados or memoQ or WordFast or something else. But and I said, well, how do you get, do you have your own customers? I think she did actually. And I said, well, how do you get your files into your working environment? Well, I just select them and the software brings it in. Well, she uses filters. She's just working with the defaults. And that's actually where we're going to be starting off today's presentation, talking about some of the defaults and advantages and disadvantages of all of that. Okay, I'm going to share the screen now. Okay, so today we're going to have a look at an unfiltered look at memoQ import filters, because these are one of the critical elements of memoQ projects, which, if not configured correctly, can result in missing information or information that you don't have to deal with being imported to the translation interface, and can result in a lot of frustration and problems. And this is part of the memoQuickies Resource Camp, an online course that will be running until the end of January, with another 2 months for people just to digest the online material and work with it. We are right now in a 2-week unit talking about filter configurations, import filter configurations in memoQ. This is one of the 7 major topics that we're going to be covering in the course of the Resource Camp. Today, I don't have a lot of slides. This slide is a list that I made for myself of various cases in which memoQ filters get used and some of the issues. It's my attempt to classify the different scenarios that might be relevant to using filters for the average translator or project manager at an LSP. And the first one on the list is the case I was just talking about with our colleague some years ago, where she thought she wasn't using filters, but in fact she was. She was simply using the defaults for the environment that she worked with, Trados, memoQ, whatever it was. And in fact, that is the way that a lot of people work. But sometimes you need to go a little bit beyond that. And so this is one of the things that we're going to be trying. This is a skill that we're going to try to build in the course of the next 2 weeks. We're going to be talking about how to adapt the default settings of the filters when you need to. One of the first examples I'd like to show you is how to get previews in your translation of InDesign files, for example, which is something that a lot of people think is not possible. And in particular, a lot of PMs at translation agencies or in corporate translation departments who outsource to independent translators, they think that this is not possible with a memoQ server, for example. It is, in fact, and I'll be showing you a simple example of how to do that. Also, we're going to talk about some cases where the default filter is actually not going to get you where you need to go. One example of this would be with Excel files. There are several different filters in memoQ that work with Microsoft Excel files, and they do different things. But If you just go with the defaults assigned by memoQ, you're always going to get the same filter. And so you need to recognize cases where perhaps you should be using some of these alternative filters and also know the process for selecting these alternatives so that you can get to the project configuration that you need to. Another one of the topics that we're going to be showing an example of today, there will be detailed lessons on some of this added to the course structure later. And I can also point you to some very good references for going into real depth with the subject matter if you need to, is how to do custom tagging in memoQ with or without filters. And what do I mean by this? Well, sometimes we get texts in, could be just about any format. It could be in a plain text file. It could be something in a Microsoft Excel file, a Microsoft Word docx, anything really, where there are certain elements in the text that gets imported that you need to be very careful of so that you don't accidentally overwrite them. These could be, for example, actual tags that were not recognized as tags for some reason. And you need to be very careful not to overwrite these because it can damage the functionality of the translated text and cause some frustrations on the part of your customer. Other examples would be placeholders that you might find in some code, text that you're localizing, perhaps for a computer game or something like that. So we'll talk about how it's possible to protect these elements and then save the configurations that are used to protect those elements so that they can be used in conjunction with import filters, for example. That particular feature in memoQ is called the Regex Tagger. It's a very powerful, very useful feature. And in fact, I have a couple of simple configurations that I'll be showing today, which are available to everyone for download if they want to pull a copy of these configurations and test them out themselves. They're common ones that I see get used a lot. One of the other points I want to talk about today is the one with about multiple formats in one file. Okay, we've probably all seen this. Well, the case of having to do tagging covers that in some cases. But for example, I've often seen Microsoft Excel files sent to me to translate where the individual cells might contain HTML code. And if you simply, with most CAP tools, if you simply import the Excel file, you're going to see all of those HTML tags exposed and potentially subject to overwriting. So one way to deal with that might be to do custom tagging, but in memoQ, you have other possibilities. If you have more than one format in a given file, it is possible to sequence different import filters so that all of the different elements of that file that you're importing will be handled correctly. So, for example, if you have a Microsoft Word file that has some actual HTML code typed out within it, perhaps it's a short tutorial on how to use HTML, you can use an HTML filter behind the Microsoft Word import filter to protect those HTML tags so that you don't accidentally overwrite them in the translation process. Also, files like Microsoft Word docx can have other files or objects embedded inside of them. Some of you may have seen Microsoft Word files that contain a PowerPoint slide as a graphic, or they might also contain an embedded spreadsheet for some financial calculations. I used to see this a lot in my financial translation work. And some of these elements can be handled automatically by the filters if you configure the import correctly. And for some of these other things, you might need to have subsequent filters in this possible chain that you can build in these, well, they call them cascading filters in memoQ. Okay, then we've also got a scenario that I've seen many, many times where I've helped a lot of individual colleagues and LSP clients deal with when you have some company that has their own proprietary data format. It's text-based, which means I can open it up in a text editor and see everything, including sometimes a lot of very weird markup. But memoQ does have facilities for dealing with that sort of thing. I'm not going to go into a lot of details with that today. It uses a feature called the Regex Text filter. Today, I'm going to show a small example of the Regex Text filter, but only to use it for segmentation, actually, which is not what it's typically intended for. Another aspect of filters, which I'm going to save for next week's presentation, is looking at how to use both filters and automated routines for pre-processing or post-processing files, or doing some sort of intermediate processing after the file has been imported to memoQ, in order to deal with all sorts of elements that need to be corrected or transformed for successful translation work. Yeah, and then there's a few other aspects that we're going to get into. Some of them we'll touch on today. I'm going to show you an example of dealing with mixed language documents and a built-in facility that memoQ has for that, which strangely a lot of people are not aware of, but and it's not perfect, but for individuals or employees in an LSP who need to do quick quotations of mixed language documents, where perhaps you've got a document that was translated from Portuguese a long time ago, so it's mostly English, but somebody's gone in and added 5 or 6 paragraphs scattered over 50 pages in Portuguese or French or whatever. And you need to give a quick quotation on how much it's going to cost to translate all of that French text, that little bit of French text that is embedded in this sea of English. Well, if you go scrolling through, selecting and copying and pasting, you might miss stuff. There's a built-in feature that can help you avoid mistakes like that. Okay, and some other aspects which will be saved for the next time around. Okay, when you're working with memoQ's default filters, the default filters make certain assumptions about the files that you're working with that may or may not be correct. But by and large, these defaults are built on what the developers think a typical file that you might be called to work on is going to be, what it's going to look like, what kind of structure it's going to have. But the thing with the defaults is that one size really does not fit all in most cases. And even for something as simple as a so-called plain text filter, the issues may not be quite so plain. For example, on the right side of this particular slide, you see a long list of different encodings. Now, most of you, some of you may not be really sure, what's a file encoding? Well, every file you have has a certain encoding, a certain system that it uses for representing the text. And different languages use different systems. So the Turks have several different systems. There are a bunch of Unicode systems, which are supposed to be largely universal, Japanese systems, Korean systems, and so on. And historically, translators or people working with translation data have tended to get a little bit confused about encodings. And so sometimes, depending on what kind of files you're working with, you might be dealing with translation files that have been imported with the wrong coding, or translation memories that have been transferred from one system to another with the wrong encoding. And the result of that, you can see toward the bottom of the slide. I just made a screenshot of some Portuguese that got a little bit garbled. Okay, it's supposed to be, what was that? Codificação, I assume. Codificação de texto. Yeah, right. Except that the letters in that first word got a bit garbled because somebody tried to move that data from one environment to another without specifying the correct coding. And when I take a look, for example, at large translation memories, at a lot of LSPs or translation memories that colleagues have shared with me, I found a lot of problems like this. To be honest, especially in cases where people have worked with WordFast at some point. WordFast seems to be particularly good at corrupting the TMs with all sorts of weird entities. But these things tend to persist. They cause a lot of problems with leveraging past translations or even finding things that you might be looking for in a concordance search. So if you understand how to work correctly with import filters and you understand that you need to match the encoding, you can avoid a lot of these problems. And usually where you would go and change the settings from one encoding to another, there's usually a preview. So you can actually look at what your text will look like when it comes into the working environment and avoid this kind of problem. But this is just one example of the limitations that you might encounter if you're working entirely with defaults. Another problem that we'll see is that sometimes your files will have other extensions. For example, let's talk about XLIF files. Okay, there are many different flavors of XLIF out there. There's, of course, XLIF with the extension XLF. That's been around for a long time. We've got XLIF with the extension XLIFF. Now, most software recognizes both of those. But then we've got the Trados version of XLIF, SDL XLIF. Okay, there are some programs that are XLIF compatible that don't recognize SDL XLIF as an extension. And in those cases, you would actually have to manually specify that the XLIF filter has to be applied to this SDL XLIF file. Or you've got mxlif from phrase or mqxlif from memoQ. All of these different variations are basically the same format, but because the extension on the file name, the part after the period, varies, it might have a format. It might have an extension, a sequence of letters that is simply not recognized by your software. And so you have to go and manually select the right filter to do the import. Now, in memoQ, if you do that a lot, you can use templates to automate that selection for you. It's one possibility we'll talk about another day. Also, these plain text files may have some special information or structures that require special handling, things we already talked about, like unprotected tags. So let's go ahead now and just have a look in memoQ at how some of this works. Okay, so the first example I'm going to use is I'm just going to show you a default filter. If you use the import function in memoQ, now under the import menu, you've got three options. The first simply says import. Seems like the logical choice in most cases. Well, if I select that, for example, here I've got an IDML file that I worked on some time ago, and let's go ahead and import that. Okay, so here I am, importing it with the defaults, minimal work. Okay, it's not a particularly big file. I've noticed that recent versions are a wee bit slower. Okay, so let's find it here in our structure. Here is the file that I just imported. So let me go ahead and have a quick look at it. It's got a German title, but I do believe that the content was English. Yep, it is. Okay, so here's my file. On the left, we have our English text, okay, such as it is. And it's going to be translated into whatever language I've got set here. Let's see. This is a multilingual project. Ah, yeah, it's German. Okay, so we've got a problem, though. Down below, we have no preview. And I like to see the physical context of the text strings that I'm translating. Well, how can I get a preview here? Well, one way I can get it is by not using the defaults to import, because the default import filter for this particular file does not specify a preview. So what am I going to do? Okay, well, I can delete it and re-import, or I can simply use the re-import function. I've selected it. I'll go ahead and tell it to re-import. Yes, I'm going to use the same file as before. Okay, but now it's showing me the same dialog that I would have seen if I had used import with options instead of just import. Okay, and the default is the Adobe InDesign IDML filter, as it says here, but I'm going to change the filter configuration. So I do that. I make sure that my file is selected, that little checkbox there, and I click this little link for changing the filter configuration. And there's one very simple little trick to getting the previews. I mark this checkbox down at the bottom that says create preview through language terminal. Now, language terminal is a free service that is offered by memoQ to everyone. You do not have to be a memoQ customer in order to have a language terminal account. Okay, how do you find language terminal? You look on languageterminal.com, all written together as one word, .com. And if you have an account on Language Terminal and you configure that in your memoQ under the memoQ menu that is in the upper left, that black box that says memoQ in white letters on it, there's the possibility to put in your login data for Language Terminal. And again, this is a free service. It's also encrypted, so I don't think you have to have any particular concerns about confidentiality issues with that. And if you have your account configured in your local copy of memoQ, then you can generate translation files, import files, and translate them that will have a preview available. Now, remember that I said your local desktop copy of memoQ. It is possible to configure the server elements of memoQ to use a language terminal account. However, it will not work for creating the previews. So if you want to have a preview in an InDesign file that is in an online project, what you need to do is first import it into a local project, as we're about to do, and then subsequently either publish the project to the server, as many project managers do at LSPs using memoQ. Not all of them created online. Often they like to work locally because it's sometimes a little faster to do the setup that way. And then they publish the finished project to memoQ. Well, that will take the imported IDML or INDD files and publish them to the server with a preview. Or they can export an MQXLZ bilingual. That's basically an XLIF file bundled with previews and other things, and then import that to the server project. Okay, so here we have specified that we're going to create that project. So we're going to use the language terminal to create the preview. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And right. Oh, the other thing that I could do with this, however, so that I don't have to go through and click that stupid button every time, is I can change the filter and configuration. I got this. Up here, there's that little diskette icon where I can save this as a new filter configuration. So here I'm going to call this IDML with language terminal. I just abbreviated LT preview. Okay, click OK. And now this will be available for selection from my menu here. And I can also get there with a shortcut, like just typing LT preview. Okay, there it is. So in the future, I'll be able to find that particular filter configuration much faster and apply it. I can also specify that saved configuration in a template. So, for example, you can create a template that basically has not much of anything configured except that it has your favorite settings for IDMLs, INDDs, docx, Excel files, and so forth, saved as the defaults. And then when you want to start a new project, you just launch that template. Okay, you manually specify whatever TMs and term bases and other resources you want. And then your files, when you import them into that project, will automatically default to your favorite configurations for the common file formats. Okay, that's an easy entry into templates for people who don't work with them yet. Okay, so there's no embedded objects there. And so I'll just go ahead and click OK, and let's see what happens now. Okay, I see some blue warning text. Says some of the selected documents will be imported through Language Terminal. This operation may take some time. Yes, it might. In fact, let's go ahead and have a look. You notice we have a new tab here. Above the document list, it says, okay, right now there's no version there. Okay, import, export. We look, and it tells me that it's being processed by Language Terminal. Okay, and so I'm going to have to wait for a while. I think I recall with this, it took about 1 or 2 minutes when I tested it earlier. So I could go here, and then when the process, I can go ahead and do other things in the project now. I can translate other files, or do whatever I like. Okay, now it's done. So to add it to my list of documents to translate, notice here there's no version, I will simply click Add to Project. And then it downloads the information from the Language Terminal server where it's been prepared. And I can also use that Language Terminal server to create PDF files of InDesign files that my client has sent me, so I don't need to bother them. Okay, yeah. Down at the bottom, you can see. Now, it's kind of a small preview, but I can still click on it, for example, and have it go to some particular segment. So, and this preview can also be undocked and put onto a separate monitor for those of you who have extra monitors that they can work with. So here we have an example of where you might want to go beyond the ordinary default filters in order to get additional functionality. Now, in terms of the routine of translating Microsoft Word files, for example, some of the settings that you might be looking at there, in fact, let's just go ahead and choose Import with Options. And let me see where I've got a Microsoft Word file that I can look at. Oh, yeah, this is an interesting one. Okay, there's not much of anything in this one, but for example, we want to have a look at the different options. It always helps if you have certain file formats that you work with a lot and where you've mostly been using the defaults. It pays to go in and actually look at the possibilities that you can work with here. For example, in Microsoft Word, there's a whole bunch of settings related to tracked changes in the document. And if you do not configure these settings before you do the work, if your client wants to see changes tracked in the final version you export, you won't be able to give them what they want unless you configure the import to do that before you bring the file in. So, for example, if I want to make sure that I'm going to be exporting the track changes markup, I mark that. Okay, and if I want to make this my default, so it does it on every single document, and then maybe I'll just accept all the changes if the client doesn't care, send it on. Okay, I might save this configuration, put it into my general template that otherwise does nothing, and make exporting the track changes the default for whenever I work with Microsoft Word files. Okay, but there are a lot of different options that are related to Microsoft Word that you can configure, for example. And you might have a particular customer who always sets up their files in a certain their Microsoft Word files in a certain way. And so you might even want to do some, now, for example, they might have hidden text, which would be instructions for somebody using a form or whatever, which would only be visible if you're showing the non-printing characters and hidden text in a Microsoft Word file. But you could go ahead and set up the configuration so it would bring the hidden text in as well, and then save that configuration with ink, some name that is relevant to your client, and then make that part of a template for processing files from that particular client so that all the Word files will automatically use these special configurations that are relevant to work for that client. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring this one in, because this will show us another interesting aspect of working with these texts. On my list of issues related to file filters, number 9 was mixed language documents. And here we have a simple example of a document in 3 languages. And you're also going to see some of the limitations of this. But let's say I just received this document and I need to give a quick quotation for translating it into Italian from, take your pick, whichever of the 3 source languages are mixed up in here. Since this project is set up for English as the source, we'll go ahead and look at it. Now, you notice, if you're familiar with memoQ, you know that when you import documents, if the document appears to be in a language other than the specified source language, you usually get a warning, and memoQ even offers to remove the document. You always have to be careful, because sometimes there's a lot of weird coding or something. You'll get that message, but really, trust me, it is in the right language. Okay, but if you make a mistake, you can avoid importing a bunch of trash. Okay, so far so good. We've got a bunch of English here. Okay, good. Scroll down a little farther. Whoops. Okay, now we're into Portuguese. Okay, but this is going to be an English to Italian translation, or an English to something or other, English to Ukrainian, I don't care. Okay, so I want to block out all of this Portuguese because it's not of interest to me or to the translator that I'm going to, and I certainly don't want to see this German. Oh my God. So I've got English, Portuguese, and German in the source. Okay, but I need to quote what it's going to cost. How much English have I got here? Okay, what do? Do I have to go through and select all of the English and put it in a separate file and count it? No. Okay, there's a simple feature in memoQ which we can find on the preparation ribbon. Okay, and here and under this is hidden. So most people are not aware that this even exists, but trust me, this is your friend if you need to do a quick and reasonably accurate count to quote a job with mixed language. Okay, so we click on the lock, unlock segments, and down at the bottom here, there's a little thing that says rows in a different language. Okay, so I'm going to select that. And mind you, you can set the number of words for which it is supposed to work. You might be getting more errors if the number gets too low. The more words in a segment, the more accurate this is. My experience historically is that this is about 98% accurate. So about 2% of the segments that should be locked won't be, or there might be a couple that got locked that shouldn't be. So this is not perfect. If you're using this to set up a job for somebody else to do, where they're not going to have the privilege to unlock segments that you've locked, or to lock some segments that should be locked, perhaps, you're going to have to go through and pay some attention to what happens before you send the job out. But I'll go ahead and just go with the defaults now. So the minimum segment length that it's going to look at is going to be 3 words. So if there's a 1-word segment or a 2-word segment in those other languages, it won't catch them. But I'll show you how to winnow those out rather quickly. Okay, so we just click OK. And you notice, see here we actually have one where it missed for some weird reason. Okay, so that one, okay, and that one and this one. Interesting. Okay, so I could, for example, just go ahead and copy that one source to target and double click here to lock it. Do the same here. Oh, I hope I don't have too much of that other stuff. Okay, so I can do a couple of manual corrections where I see something that should not have been. But okay, scrolling through, okay, here's a couple of short segments that weren't handled. Now, how can I find those short problematic segments? I can sort. So I can sort by text length, source text length with the shorter stuff first. Oh, I can also use my filter to show me only the segments that are not locked. So once that's done, I can look. So I've got a bunch of numbers. What's going on with those? Okay, look at those. Okay, that's numbering. All right, I could go ahead and lock that while I'm at it. Copy it source to target and lock it. So I can select, just move down with my cursor, for example. Okay, and then here I've got, whoops, purpose. That's what I get for leaning on my. Okay, so I need to go a little slower with my down arrows. Okay, so we've got that, and I can also hold down my control. Oh, whoops, no, I can't hold down my control key. Okay, so I can find the short segments. I can copy them, source to target, for example, and go ahead and lock those as well. So, but even without doing that, the rough count of the unlocked stuff is going to be, by my experience, about it's going to be roughly accurate. It's going to be accurate within about 2%. So if I'm under a lot of time pressure, I can get the quotation for the work out the door quickly, and then get on to other things and wait and see if it's been see if that's been agreed to. Also, if you need to take the sections that are in the other languages and make them available for translation, here, for example, this doesn't work out so well if you've got 2 languages locked out. But if this were, say, just English and German, and I want to send the German text out to somebody, I could create a view here and show only the rows that are locked in the view. Okay. Stuff to send out. We'll forget for the moment that there's also Portuguese in there. Okay, memoQ is creating a filtered view of only the segments that were locked because they're in another language. And can't even spell stuff. Very good. So we go ahead and open that up. And okay, here we are with the Portuguese and the German. But here in this view, I could go ahead and unlock those segments, export an XLIF file, for example, and then send it out for translation, and then bring it in later with the corrected text. And so I can keep my, and then of course, relock this before I close the view. And this way I can actually send out material with different languages to be translated from the same source document. Okay, so that's a little aside on dealing with those mixed language documents. Let's have a quick look now at some simple cases with importing some text files. And I'm going to first import. Okay, a very simple text file. Yeah, why not? Here we have a very simple text. And the latest version of memoQ has some weird bugs sometimes when trying to view text files in the import dialog. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so again, we're using a default filter to bring in a simple text file. Okay, and just have a quick look at that simple text file. There's not much of anything in it. I think it's the, let me close this. Right, it's the description of this afternoon's discussion. Okay, so there's our simple text file. There's not much to this, so in this case, the default was a good thing. But let's say I've got another file, which, let's see if I've got it here. Ah, yes. Okay, another very simple text file. Okay, but here it has a different extension. Instead of txt, it's got my txt. Okay, so let's have a look in memoQ at how we can import that one. We go to the import function, and we don't see it. Oh my God. You know, what can I do about this? Well, there is this list here of all of the supported file formats that this could be. And if you have some extension that memoQ doesn't know what to do with, and you want to import that or try to import it into your CAT tool, you need to choose all files. It's always at the bottom of the list. Okay, so I'll go ahead and select all files, and suddenly my list of available files increases. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to take this one here instead. It's also a my text file, right? So we're going to open this. Now I was using the import, okay, which picks the defaults. However, this is an unknown file type. So instead of just automatically importing it, okay, memoQ just says, hey, wait a minute. You need to tell me which filter to use. So in this particular case, I'm going to tell it, all right, I think this is just plain text. It kind of looked like plain text to me. So I'm just going to type text here. Okay, here we go. No, it's plain text. Here we go, plain text. Default, and let's see what happens with this one. Okay, and here is my very simple markup file. And we'll go ahead and open up. And it's coming just fine with a plain text file. Except, oh my God, we've got all this extra stuff. Okay, this looks like it's some kind of control code stuff. Oh, you know actually what it is. It's something very similar to HTML. It's called BB code, and it's basically HTML with square brackets. You actually run into this sometimes with certain customers. I've seen it a lot from one of the CMS systems used at the chemical company Merck, for example. Okay, but when I'm translating this, I need to be careful and not mess up these. Well, they're just a form of tag. Okay, so I need to protect those. What can I do? Okay, here we're getting into the custom tagging that I was talking about. To access the custom tagging functions, once you have already imported the file and you just want to get down to translate it, you don't want to go messing with the import filters a lot at this point. You go to the preparation ribbon, and here under other, you have the Regex Tagger. Okay, so we'll go ahead and click on the Regex Tagger and see what we can do with all of that. Okay, and it shows me the text that I've got here. Okay, and shows me the result of my 0 configuration. Now, I could start typing a bunch of regex here, but why bother? I've already saved the configuration. This is one of those downloadable configurations that you can get yourself. I also have all of the regex for this kind of stuff in regex assistant libraries that I distribute. I have to check and see if I already distributed it when we were doing that unit or if I was waiting to distribute it later when we got into the filters, but I will make it available for download in the course structure. So I'm going to go ahead and select this option for unprotected BB code markup. Okay, and it's actually saved with a different example. So it kind of looks like it might do what I need it to do. So let's go ahead and just click OK. And sure enough, all of those funny structures that I need to be careful of are now protected as inline tags. And you can do similar things using the pattern that maybe catalog numbers follow, or variables for inserting player names in a game that you're localizing or whatever. Any information that follows some kind of a pattern can be defined and turned into a custom tagging command. And when you go through and create your custom regex configuration for creating the tags, again, you have this little icon available here to save that configuration. Now, the interesting thing about that is that once you have saved those configurations, you can use them in an import filter. And I'll show you how to do that now. So I'm just going to remove this thing here. Yes, I really do want to remove it. And now we're going to re-import this thing from scratch, but we're going to take our regex tagger configuration and put it behind the text filter. So now I can import with options. Once again, I'm going to have to choose all files. This zoom bar keeps getting in my way. Okay, we've got all files. Okay, another very simple markup text. Great, that's the one that I want. Now, what we're going to do is, here I'm going to type plain. Okay, here's my plain. I've already saved it. But I'm going to rebuild. Okay, so I've got my plain text filter right here. And then I'm going to click Change Filter and Configuration. Okay, so right now I've just got a plain text filter, but I want to use that special regex tagger configuration behind the text filter so I don't have to go and run the regex tagger. Well, I tell it to add a cascading filter. And as it happens, the only thing that you're allowed to add in that sequence for text files is something from the regex tagger. Now, if you need to use something else, it's possible to do that. You can hack all of these filters so that you can create whatever sequence of filters you really need, regardless of whether memoQ thinks you should be allowed to do that. I will have a separate lesson later that I will publish on how to hack the filters, but I have a couple of hacked filter configurations available for download if you need them and you want to try it out. Okay, so here's my Regex Tagger thing that I'm going to add. And right here in the list, I have my saved configuration for tagging the BB code. Okay, so whatever things you find that you need to do custom tagging for at some point, if you remember to save those configurations, or you receive them from your favorite consultant like Marek Pavlich or some other expert, okay, you can just select them like that. Okay, you don't need to know any regex coding to do this. All right, so I've got this. Now, I've got this combination of the regex, and see, there's all my configurations that were added right there. Now, I could save this combination of the plain text and regex tagger for the BB code right here. I could also, if I have other things, maybe I've also got some just ordinary tags, or maybe I've got some curly bracket structures that I need to filter. I can add another cascading filter. And let's see, I don't actually have any single curly bracket things, but I could go ahead and pretend that I did. Okay, so now I have a 3-level filter. First, the plain text filter, then one to get those BBQ'd tags. And then if I had placeholders, maybe with names from a mail merge template or something like that, that are written inside of curly brackets, okay, this particular regex tagger configuration I added would take care of that. Okay, so let's go ahead and say okay. Okay, I could save that, as I say, and then that's available as a filter, which I could then export and share with other people. Okay, so we've got the whole thing there, and we're going to click OK. So what we've just seen here is, here we go, how to build, in this case, a 3-level filter, although I only needed 2 of those levels. And there it is, already marked up. Oh, this was a this was a different file. Okay, this was the one for which I created another import filter, because this one had the paragraphs run together with break tags. Okay, so there was another filter for that. So I could do re-import. Whoops, I chose the wrong filter. That's fine. And now, yes. Wait a minute, is this the one that I had configured? Plain text, recently used. Plain. Yeah, I think this might be it. And a quick look at the configuration and see if this is in fact the one I think it is. Okay, here's the regex text filter. Yes, okay. This is the one where I told it to exclude those funny break tags. And that actually had the function of segmenting there. So it's sort of an unusual use of that filter. Okay, so go ahead and click OK. Right, and let's have a look and see what we've got now. Okay, and now our segmentation is proper. All of our BB code is marked up and protected and so forth. So then that was a 3-level filter right there. So here you see some examples of different ways that we can configure the import filters in memoQ in order to structure the imported text in a way that we can work more accurately and more safely with it without accidentally damaging any structures that the customer needs for the functionality of their files. Okay, so going back to the list that we started off with in the beginning. Okay, we've seen how the default filters work, but they often don't quite do what you need. So you've seen how you can go in using import with options to make adjustments to those default settings. And if these are adjustments that you're going to need to do routinely, you can save these. So you can simply choose them from a list, or you can incorporate them into templates for a greater degree of automation, which can save you a lot of time. If, for example, you're a project manager working at an LSP, this can be a major time saver for you and can leave you and can also reduce the possibility of making errors because maybe you're under pressure and you'll forget to attach some important resource, or you'll attach the wrong file, the wrong import configuration. Okay, we've also, I didn't demonstrate that, but I can do that on another occasion in a separate lesson. So for the cases, for example, of where you may want to have a different default for Excel files. If you want to have the multilingual delimited text filter instead of having your Excel files, your Excel filter be the default, you can do that. In fact, I think I've got that. Let me screen share again just briefly. Okay. So yeah, here we are. Let me close this project. Oh, well, you could see that there anyway. Whoops. Okay, here, for example, I've got this template in my shortcuts here, KSL routine stuff. And in fact, if I click on that, I think hang on, let me look in the resource console, which is where I do all of my editing for these project templates. All right, and KSL routine stuff. Let me edit this one and see. Okay, if you want to specify your own special filter configurations as the default, this is a project template that has nothing in it except a special setting that I wanted to use for importing. So to find that, you open up your project template in the editor and you go to settings. And then in this list of icons, you go to the tools, the so-called language independent resources. And here, for example, yes, this is where I put in a special configuration that I have of the multilingual delimited text filter cascaded with HTML. Now, this is another hacked filter. This is something that memoQ will tell you can't be done. But the reason that I cascaded it with HTML is that by doing this, it takes the contents of the cell that gets imported from the Excel spreadsheet, which is normally used as an entire segment, and it breaks it up according to punctuation. Okay, the defaults for a regular Microsoft Excel filter are if you have 4 or 5 sentences in one cell, it'll parse each sentence into a separate segment. But if you are using the multilingual delimited text filter, which gets used for Excel more than it does for delimited text, they just named it that way because they were copying Trados years ago. If you have that, it takes the entire cell contents as one segment. So if you have a cell that has 3 sentences, for example, that will end up in one memoQ segment. And because of that, a lot of colleagues or a lot of project managers do not use the multilingual delimited text filter, even when it makes more sense for them to do that because of this problem. And so by combining it with the HTML filter behind that thing for processing the Excel file, it splits it up into sentences. And I use this even if there's no HTML. Even if it's just plain text where you've got 3 or 4 sentences in a single cell and you want to split those up, fine. The HTML filter will do it just fine. This configuration is available for download from the course structure, so you can use it. But in any case, if I've got other special things like maybe if I've saved a docx filter that will automatically export my track changes for my client, I can specify that as the default here. or any other defaults that I want. So I don't have to think about it and realize halfway through my project, oh my God, I should have done, this. So anyway, that's a lot of material quickly. Are there any questions? I see there's a bunch of things in the chat. It's difficult for me to follow chat. Yeah, go see. What's go see? Sorry. Okay. Well, anyway, are there any questions regarding the filter configurations or other issues related to filters? In the time when we're doing this particular unit in the course, if anybody's got any special personal filter challenges that they need help with that are not super proprietary, I'm more than happy to help you with them, take them on, and we'll just use them as further examples in the course. There's also, and I've got a lot of stuff on filters on my YouTube channel, also on the blog. So if you're interested in finding out more about the multilingual delimited text filter, oh, I love that cat. I recommend have a look at my YouTube channel. I've got several things on that. Also, if you ever do any work for TransPerfect and you get packages from them, I have a video that I made for a Polish colleague a while back who needed to do that, which shows you how to build a relatively complex filter that will make it much easier to handle those TransPerfect jobs, which actually just use the WordPerfect engine. They just use different file extensions than I'm WordPerfect, WordFast Pro. They use different file extensions in WordFast Pro, but it's the same format. Eve sold them the technology more than a decade ago. But anyway, are there any questions about today's content? I have a template for WordFast. Yeah, pre and post process. Yeah. Oh, Marek has a template. Have you published it on your blog? Where can people find it?
No, it was not published. I made it for a client some time ago, but I can provide it for anyone who's interested.
Okay. I mean, it's basically probably more or less the same thing that's described in that video, but if it saves manual configuration work, all the better. Okay, great. See, he's the source of all kinds of cool resources. As a matter of fact, soon we are going to be publicizing some stuff. Marek is coming to Portugal, to Lisbon, at the end of January, beginning of February, to teach a couple of courses with me. One of them will be a week-long project manager course that will do a deep dive, first off with memoQ basics, since project managers often have to explain a lot of basic things to some of the translators that they work with. So we're going to help them get grounded in that, maybe fill in any gaps that they might have there. And then we're going to get into a lot of details on configuring and managing online projects on a memoQ server. That's also potentially of interest to independent translator teams that work together with tools like memoQ Cloud, for example, which is really useful for collaboration. But if you don't know the basics of managing online projects in memoQ, your head will explode when you try to do that. So it really helps to bone up on these things before you start renting servers. Are there any other questions? Okay, if not, I thank you all for your attendance and your patience today. The recording of this, assuming that I didn't forget to record.
Excuse me, Kevin, I think Nofar was trying to ask something.
Oh, Nofar, unmute yourself.
Yeah, it's okay. Hi, Kevin. Hi. Thank you, Marek. Is it okay if I have 2 questions? One is related to filtering and the other
questions
for memoQ in general. Thank you. So if I'm uploading a PDF file or an IDML file, how can I identify any line breaks? Can I do it only in the project in memoQ, or is it any other way to do it?
Identify a line break.
Yeah, like when you do to a Word document that you do the cleaning of the document. So right. How would you do it on a PDF file, or if it's a closed file?
Okay, it's an interesting subject you bring up. In fact, I think this is one of those things which is on our laundry list for the PM course in January. PDF files are a complicated subject. Okay, there are a lot of different PDF formats, a lot of different ways you can approach that. My usual way of dealing with PDFs is to run screaming out the door. No, seriously though, importing PDF directly into memoQ, unless it is a very simple text file, is a bad idea. It's a bad idea in any CAT tool, because beyond the simplest of single column text formats, you will never get a good result. Even the somewhat better import filters for Trados Studio, for example, that convert the PDF into a docx, they really make a mess of things. There are breaks where you don't want them. The spacing just goes to hell completely. So usually the best, and usually the client doesn't want PDF as the output. Sometimes they do. Okay, you might have like a concert poster that is ready to go to print, but now we need a version in another language, but it's got really complex layouts. Okay, in those situations, some of the PDF to PDF solutions like Trans PDF or the Iceni Infix XML workflow works really well. In fact, the latter, the XML workflow in Iceni Infix, even works with PDF files that are password protected. If your client screws up and sends you a password protected file, you can still get the job done, or at least work on it until they send you a proper file and then translate out of your TM later. But usually what you want to do is you want to pre-process in a good optical character recognition software, something like OmniPage, or if you're still using Russian software, Abby Fine Reader. There's a few other options out there. Solid PDF. Which one works for you is going to depend a lot on the files you work with. I tend to do everything very manually using Abby Fine Reader because I deal with a lot of different formats, and most of these, one button solutions just blow up with half the stuff I see. But that may not be the case for you. But generally, prep it and try to create a clean text file or a clean file in Word where you do as many corrections as possible before you import to memoQ. The other approach that I use, which I mentioned already, is Trans PDF or the XML exports from Iceni Infix. I find the XML exports, for example, particularly useful if I want PDF content to go into live docs just for reference. But if I'm translating and I export the translated XML file and re-import it to the PDF using Iceni Infix, it'll give me a PDF document as my final product. But it's rare that this is what the client's actually looking for. Now, if the layout looks good and they want Word and you're in a vindictive mood, you could take that final PDF and then run it through one of those OCR converters and give them some horrible crap. I wouldn't do that, though. It's not. It's much better off to do a clean conversion and then take your text file or Word file and do it. And then I find it takes less work to add formatting to a clean OCR than it does to go correct the problems by trying to use, maybe the OCR with full layout or something. No, go plain text and then add the formatting back in most of the time, or you'll just hate life. And the other solutions they've got, memoQ has 3 options for PDF import. The plain text one, which is okay if it's a really simple plain text PDF. The Trans PDF workflow, which gives you a PDF as the end product, which most people aren't going to want. You also have to be careful because you create an account with Iceni or whichever company bought them now. And I think you can only have 10 files in your account online. So you have to remember to go in and delete the old files when you no longer need them, or one day it just stops working and you wonder why. And then there's a third option in the PDF import for memoQ, which is complete garbage and you should never use it. It's the one that converts to a docx, but the end of every line becomes a break. And it's format hell. I don't know why they even leave that in there. It's irresponsible. Trados Studio's conversion is garbage, but it's much better than that. So just save yourself a lot of grief and do good OCR. Your other question was?
Yeah. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Go for it.
Thank you. So it's a problem that my manager and I have been encountering in memoQ for quite some time now, and we contacted the support, but we didn't. It's still an issue for us. So as you can see in the settings of a certain project, we want to remove the default option of the QA, and we were unable to do that. We want this one to be. We defined this one as default, and we thought that this might solve the problem, but I still need to manually change sometimes in the project from this option.
Okay, what you want to do, if you have, do you have a routine QA configuration you want to apply to all your projects?
We usually use this one.
Okay, well, then set that as the default in your server administrator. Go up to the server administrator, select that. Okay, it's taking a while to open here. Okay, when the server administrator opens, select your default resources. You may, you know what, Nofar, I think you may not be sharing screen one, you might be sharing the application.
Okay, yeah.
And unfortunately, the pop-up dialogues, yeah, you have to reshare.
Okay.
The pop-up dialogues are...
now it's okay?
I don't know. We'll see. It's taking a while to open. You need to open the server administrator.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Now do your connection, default server resources, select the segmentation rules. That's the far left. Okay.
Yeah, the QA
right,
settings.
Now set the language. Oh, okay, you've got all your languages. Okay, you've got default. Okay, but go to the language, whichever the main. I think you're mostly translating from Hebrew, right?
Yeah, from Hebrew to English.
Okay, so select Hebrew from your dropdown, and let's just make sure that it's the default for Hebrew.
Okay.
It is. So now every time you create a new project, it will use that default copy updated by default.
So it won't mark this one, the other one that I don't want. It won't.
Well,
right?
It's not being used. What will be used instead will be the default copy updated, and this will be the segmentation. Sorry, were these segmentation? Oh, sorry, this is QA. Sorry.
Yeah, QA settings.
These will be the QA settings that are used by default in all of your new projects. If you have an existing project, you'll have to go make that switch in the project settings.
So I need to change it manually in each project. It won't
in
do it
a project that already exists.
Yeah.
But in a new project, when you created it, will use the defaults that you set. You probably had your you probably configured your default after you'd already created those projects.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you can't go and retroactively change a bunch of existing projects.
I see. Okay. I see.
You got to do the legwork. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you.
But this is the approach you can use for any of the resources that we talk about here. You know, in the local projects, you use the memoQ options. In server or online projects, you use the server administrator in the default resources, and then you select whatever defaults you want, your auto translation rules for numbers or currency or whatever.
Kevin, if I may, one comment. Yes. You made a mistake because you thought that she wants to change segmentation rules, but this is QA, and QA
QA
by target language, not by source.
Yes.
Not Hebrew, but English. Okay, it can be the same configuration, but
you know, we need to create a map of that for the course in January, because some of these resources are, like you say, governed by source language. Like segmentation, and others, like a lot of the times, I mean, some of my auto translation rules the choice is governed by the source language. Sometimes it's governed by the target language, and sometimes it's governed by both. So yeah, which language source or target is relevant to a given resource is kind of all over the map, and it would probably help to build a matrix for reference. Thank you for the reminder. Yeah. So what happens when you don't get enough sleep? Okay, any other questions? Okay, if not, thank you everybody for your patience today, and I will have the recording available probably within the next 24 hours. It takes a while for these things saved in the cloud to process, and I probably won't get around to editing until later tonight or tomorrow. But anyway, thank you very much, and I will be adding specific lesson material to the course structure with the topics that we've touched on today. A copy of the slides is available under the title of Introduction for now. I'm going to rewrite that section later, but it's there sort of as a placeholder, and so you can download those slides just as personal notes if you need to. And I hope to see you all next week. Next week, we're going to get into some of the other related topics, as well as any specific cases for filtering that you might want to look at. I will also take that scenario for the IDML and INDD, the InDesign files, and I'm creating a couple of videos on that, including one in German for one of the course participants who works with a German server. So, and maybe I'll do one in Spanish if I feel like it. But anyway, there will be more information on the InDesign solution available soon. This is something I encourage you to share with people that you collaborate with, in case having the previews in InDesign can be helpful. One other thing I want to say in conclusion, something else that can help a lot with the InDesign situation or with just about any other file format is to get to know something called the memoQ PDF preview tool. Okay, this is not really filtering. I've got one or two videos on this. There's some information on the memoQ help. This is a separate program that is available free from memoQ that you have to download and install. And what it will do is, if you make a PDF of the text that you're translating, it is able to access that PDF while you're going through the working grid and then highlight whatever segment you're working on in the displayed PDF, usually drawing a red box around it. Sometimes there's a few glitches with it, and it won't work well if you have a very large PDF. So if you have a huge PDF with a lot of graphics, I recommend that you downsample the graphics. What does that mean? It means you print from PDF to PDF and look at your settings in the print driver and print low resolution. So that way you can take like a 30 megabyte PDF and probably make a 3 megabyte PDF out of it. And 3 megabyte PDFs work fine. Once you start getting above about 5 megabytes, though, it starts getting a little dicey. And at 20, unless you've got a lot of RAM, you're going to have problems. Or the other trick I use is I might divide my PDF up into chapters using something like Iceni Infix in the unlicensed version to separate out the pages I want and then just use those in the preview. But this PDF preview tool, let's see, it's free. It works with anything. And I use it also when I translate SDL XLIF files in memoQ. I ask for a copy of the PDF. And if it's big, I chop it up as necessary. And then that way, I always see my context in the original document or in the original layout. And for me, this is often a lot more useful than the actual memoQ preview that's down below the translated grid. So something that you might want to go look for. There's not a lot of information out there, and strangely, a lot of people don't know about this thing. But it can be a real lifesaver on projects because it keeps you focused on the original layout and helps you avoid a lot of stupid translation errors. Anyway, All of you have a great rest of the week. And if there's any questions or issues, you know how to reach me through social media. Talk to you later.